Without a doubt, tattoos represent a rising trend, with more and more people seen with tattoos that have aesthetic or symbolic purposes, and even, in some cases, cultural and artistic. However, depending on the context of a tattoo, it can be inappropriate and even offensive for what it represents, and in many cases, without the person who wears it even knowing it. Today, we are going to see the top 10 tattoos you should never get. Mermaid tattoo. A mermaid could often be considered a nice design for a tattoo, especially among women, as it shows femininity, fantasy, and mysticism because of what mermaids represent as supernatural beings. However, in the context of prisons, a mermaid tattoo on a convict has a very different meaning and representation. That is, any prisoner who has committed a crime against a child, whether of a sexual, physical, or psychological nature, is obliged to get such a tattoo. In this way, they are marked, and so that the other prisoners know that they are of the worst kind. In this way, the prisoner who carries the mermaid marked on his body is seen as a psychopath, at least for acts committed against minors, which could cause him problems with other prisoners. Clown tattoo. Getting a tattoo of a clown might seem harmless for various reasons, which can range from aesthetic purpose to simply liking such characters. But without going any further, specifically in Brazil, getting such a tattoo could have disastrous consequences. That's because in Brazil, a criminal gets a clown tattoo on a visible part of the body when they have killed a police officer. In addition, they usually display the work as a trophy, as it is recognized among gangs and other criminals. However, the police also know the meaning of the tattoo, and therefore it is not advisable to have it if you are a law-abiding person, as it could lead to serious misunderstandings with the law. So the same. Playing card tattoo. Playing card tattoos are a classic and are very common, especially in men, since these have a nice aesthetic design. In prisons and organized crime gangs, playing cards or cards each have their own meaning. For example, spades, hearts, and aces represent that they have committed a specific type of crime, the time they have spent in prison, or their reputation and experience. For that reason, if a member has a tattoo with several cards, it could mean that they are one of the bosses. For this reason, getting playing card tattoos is not recommended, as it risks conflicts with criminals. And for them, it's offensive for a person to have a design of this type that doesn't match the reality of your experience, or crimes like a criminal. And now you know that YouTuber Auronplay is actually a dangerous criminal, as his demonstrates. Star tattoos. Without a doubt, star tattoos are some of the most popular tattoos for both women and men, even becoming a trend, especially in the minimalist style. However, in prison, star tattoos have a very different meaning and vary according to the part of the body where they are made. For example, if a star tattoo is worn on the upper back in prison, it's because the person wearing it is highly respected in the facility. Whereas if the stars are tattooed on the knees, does it mean that the person in question doesn't obey anyone or doesn't have loyalty to anyone in particular, but to himself? For this reason, when someone gets a star tattoo of this kind for aesthetic purposes, it can be offensive to those who carry these symbols and know their meaning, as they perceive it as if their authority or their five-pointed crown tattoo. The five-pointed crown tattoo is a representative symbol of the criminal gang, the Latin Kings, which happens to be the most dangerous gang operating in the United States and has Hispanic origins and members. Is this tattoo a design that is made on all their members to recognize each other? In this sense, getting a five-pointed crown tattoo can undoubtedly represent risks, both with the police, Knowing these, what does the tattoo mean? And even in a worst-case scenario, if the one who wears it happens to run into a gang member, as they could consider it a lack of respect towards them. Spiderweb tattoo. A tattoo that became a trend a few years ago and is still very common to see among some people. It's the spiderweb, which is usually tattooed on the elbows, and is a clear representation of the black work style. Well, it turns out that this spiderweb tattoo actually comes from prisons, and each complete circle of the spiderweb has a very specific meaning. It can either mean the years of imprisonment, as well as the years spent under the effects of drug addiction or alcoholism. That's why it's not a good idea to get a spiderweb tattoo on your elbows for aesthetic purposes, as its meaning can be ignored. They might not know that someone at some point could interpret it as a challenge to a former convict or a former addict, or simply give an image of you, which I suppose you don't want. Like cross tattoo on the chest. As you may already know, tattoo designs can have a special meaning or none at all. However, in some countries, there are specific designs that, depending on the region and context, these can have a general meaning. For example, in Russia, cross tattoos on the chest are related to the country's criminal gangs, such as the Vratva, having a kind of distinctive seal among them, which is related to reputation and influence. That is, it is very dangerous to get such a tattoo in Soviet territory for obvious reasons, since despite not being exposed, it could be interpreted as a challenge against other gangs. Or, worse yet, as a member who, in terms of their belief, would become an imposter, having to receive a punishment and even having to pay. With his life. Yakuza-style Japanese tattoo. It's true that currently in Japan the stigma against tattoos has decreased a bit, but its association with criminal gangs and thugs is still far from being overcome, especially if a person has a Yakuza-style Japanese S tattoo. This style of tattoo can cover absolutely the entire body, except the neck, hands, and the sternum line. Among the most popular designs are fish, carp, dragons, and others that make it unmistakable, and also reserved only for members of the mafia. Yakuza. If a person has this type of tattoo and goes to Japan, they might not be welcomed in many places. They could face discrimination and even be mistaken for a member of the Yakuza, bringing them problems with the law or with actual members of the clan. In fact, it's very likely that some people who have this type of tattoo aren't even able to enter the country. Buddha or Eastern deities tattoo. When people get tattoos of Buddha or other Eastern deities, but reside in the West, there is no major problem, even if it were to be considered as something spiritual. However, in Asian countries, there can be inconveniences when it comes to visible works that can be easily seen on your skin. In countries like Japan, China, South Korea, and many other Asian countries, having tattoos of Buddha and other gods of their culture is considered blasphemy. Therefore, people who have them can be socially frowned upon and even taken to the police station, despite their status as a tourist or visitor in the country, since ignoring such reality does not exempt them from that offense. Tear tattoo on the eye. The tattoo of a tear on the eye has spread as a trend among various artists and famous people, especially among trap and reggaeton singers. And as something that becomes trendy, well, it's spreading. And there are quite a few people getting this type of tattoo, but without even knowing that in reality the teardrop tattoo has a much more tragic and violent meaning, for which I think you will agree with me that no one should specifically get this tattoo. Does it mean that its bearer has committed a murder or tried to do so? So the tattoo is directly related to a serious crime that in many cases people who get it are totally ignorant of, also risking their perception of being a good person.